He never saw her. Not really. Not until another man made her laugh and the most dangerous man in Chicago forgot how to hide what he felt. Maybe you know that kind of pain. Being the one who stays quiet, works hard, loves deeply, and still gets looked through like glass. This story begins in a place that feels painfully real. A polished office tower, cold morning light on steel and marble, a girl behind a desk trying not to take up too much space, and a man powerful enough to silence a room with one glance. Then one small laugh changes everything. What makes this story different is not just the obsession, the power, or the danger. It is the moment an invisible woman becomes the only thing a ruthless man can see. Watch to the end then, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. And in a city like Chicago, a moment like that never arrived without witnesses. The morning began with pale winter light sliding over the river and catching on the glass of Kane Meridian Holdings. From the street, the tower looked cold enough to cut a person. All steel-mirrored windows and money. Inside, everything gleamed. Black marble under soft, recessed lights. Polished brass at the reception desk. Elevators that opened without a sound. The kind of building where people lowered their voices even before they knew why. Ava Bennett arrived at 7:15 as she always did. She liked the city before it fully woke up, before the traffic thickened, before the office filled with perfume, expensive shoes, and people who knew how to smile without showing too much of themselves. At that hour, the floor outside Damian Kane's office still belonged to silence. Just the hum of climate control, the distant hiss of a printer warming up, and the quiet click of Ava setting her bag down beside her desk. She was 24 and careful in all the ways the world had taught her to be. Careful with money. Careful with her voice. Careful with the way she crossed a room. She wore a cream blouse tucked into a dark skirt, simple gold studs in her ears, and her brown hair pinned back in a neat twist that never lasted past lunch. There was nothing flashy about her. Nothing in her appearance that asked to be admired. Most days that was the point. Her desk sat outside the private executive office on the top-occupied floor, near a long stretch of windows that faced the river. From there she handled the rhythm of a man's life without ever stepping inside it. Calls, schedules, meeting notes, last-minute changes, quiet emergencies, the endless, delicate work of making sure powerful people never had to see the machinery that kept them comfortable. For a year she had done that work for Damian Kane. For a year he had passed her desk without truly seeing her. It would have been easier if he had been ugly, or kind, or ordinary. But Damian Kane was none of those things. He was the kind of man people noticed before they were ready to. Tall enough to make a doorway feel smaller, always immaculate. Dark suits that seemed cut onto him instead of sewn. Hands that never fidgeted. Eyes so steady they made liars nervous. He moved through a room as if time itself knew better than to stand in his way. Officially, he was the chief executive officer of Kane Meridian Holdings, a company with fingers in real estate, freight security contracts and development projects all over the Midwest. Unofficially, he was a rumor people did not repeat unless the music was loud and the door was shut. Some said he had inherited more than money from his father. Some said Chicago still had men who operated by old rules, and Damian Kane was one of the few who understood both worlds, the legal one and the one that existed after midnight, the world of contracts and the world of consequences. Ava had heard enough in elevators and break rooms to know where to stop listening. She never asked questions about him. She did something far more dangerous. She paid attention. At 8:10, she straightened the stack of briefing folders on her desk and turned on the small brass lamp she preferred over the harsher overhead lights. She checked the coffee order for the morning board call, answered 3 emails, and flagged a scheduling conflict between legal and acquisitions before anyone else noticed it. Her fingers moved fast over the keyboard. She liked the order of office work, the small, private satisfaction of fixing things before they became visible. A cleaning woman rolled a cart past and smiled at her. Ava smiled back. The floor began to wake. Men in navy suits, women in heels sharp enough to count as weapons, assistants with clipped voices and tablets tucked against their ribs. Ava stayed where she always stayed, behind her desk with the river at her back and Damien Kane's closed office door 10 feet in front of her. She could feel him there even when he had not arrived yet. Not because she was foolish, not because she believed in the kind of romance that floated on violins. It was simpler than that. Repetition made its own intimacy. A year of hearing the elevator chime and feeling the whole floor straighten had taught her his presence long before it taught her his face. She knew the sound of his footsteps, knew the brief pause before he entered a conference room, knew the particular silence that followed him down a corridor. She also knew the exact moment she had fallen in love with him, which was a detail she had never shared with another living soul. It had been in early spring, 5 months after she started. The lobby had been chaos that day. A charity luncheon upstairs, reporters outside a city official arriving late and in a foul mood. Ava had gone down to deliver corrected seating cards and stepped off the elevator into a storm of voices. In the middle of it all stood a little boy in a blue coat no older than 6, crying with both fists pressed to his eyes. His mother was nowhere in sight. The security desk was on the phone. 2 event planners were whispering about liability. People looked at the child, then looked away. Then Damien Kane crossed the lobby. He had been moving fast with 2 men at his side when he stopped. Just stopped. No show. No announcement. He bent down in that expensive suit, picked up a small toy car lying on the floor, and held it out to the boy. "Here," he said. The kid sniffed hard, took it and stared. Damien glanced once at security. "Find his mother." The words were quiet, nothing dramatic, but everyone moved. By the time the boy's mother came running through the lobby, Ava was still standing near the elevator, holding seating cards in numb fingers. Damien did not wait to be thanked. He was already gone, walking toward the private lift as if kindness was something he had no interest in being seen doing. That should have been all. Instead, that tiny private moment cracked something open in her. After that, she noticed too much. She noticed that he never flirted with women who leaned too close. That he always remembered people's names when power demanded it, but never used charm as a shortcut. That he listened longer than most men in charge and spoke only when he had decided what the room was worth. He frightened people, yes, but he never seemed entertained by that fear. There was something almost weary in him, sometimes a loneliness he wore under all that control like another layer of tailored fabric. Ava had no business seeing any of that, but she did. And somewhere between watching him kneel for a crying child and hearing him dismantle a senior vice president with 3 quiet sentences in a quarterly meeting, she made the stupidest mistake of her life. She loved him, silently, pointlessly, completely. No one knew. No one would have guessed. She was too good at hiding. Years of being overlooked had made her skilled at disappearing in plain sight. If you grow up in a house where louder people take up all the air, you learn early how to fold yourself small. Her father had left when she was 9. Her mother worked double shifts for most of Ava's childhood and came home too tired to notice the difference between a quiet daughter and a lonely one. By the time Ava was old enough to want more, she had already trained herself not to ask. So she asked nothing from Damien Kane. A glance would have been enough. A good morning spoken like he meant it. Proof that she existed beyond function. At 8:42, the private elevator opened. 2 security men stepped out first. Conversations died on the floor the way candles die when a window opens. Then Damien emerged. He wore a charcoal coat over a black suit, gloves in one hand, phone in the other. The winter air had put color in his face, and his hair was slightly windswept in a way that made him look more dangerous rather than less. Mason Shaw followed a step behind, broad-shouldered and watchful, his expression carved into professional blankness. Damien did not hurry. He never had to. He moved toward his office, and the line of employees on the floor straightened almost without meaning to. A few murmured good morning. One senior analyst snapped shut a conversation he should not have been having in the hall. Ava rose from her chair because that was what she always did. "Good morning, Mr. Kane." His eyes remained on his phone for one more second. Then he gave the slightest nod and passed her desk. No pause, no glance, no recognition. The sting should not have surprised her. It happened all the time. Still, for a brief, foolish second, she had hoped maybe this morning would be different. He had been out of the office for 4 days, handling something in St. Louis, according to the rumors drifting back through executive email. 4 days was long enough for Hope to do stupid things. She sat down and opened the revised agenda for the 10 o'clock operations meeting. Her chest felt tight in that old familiar way, the kind of ache you get when a bruise is pressed in the exact same spot again. She inhaled once, squared her shoulders, and kept working. It was easier that way. A voice broke the quiet 15 minutes later. "Tell me you have not had coffee yet, because then I look like a hero." Ava looked up. Ryan Foster stood at the edge of her desk, holding out a cup with a grin that could have lit a windowless room. He was 6 feet tall, with sandy hair, a broad frame, and the easy confidence of a man people tended to like on first sight. He worked in building security, mostly on lower floors, though lately he had found reasons to be upstairs more often than his job required. Ava blinked at the cup. "You brought me coffee?" Ryan placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. "That is not the reaction I was hoping for." She smiled, despite herself. "I mean, thank you. I just did not know you were up here this early. Terrible loss for your morning, I know." He set the cup carefully beside her keyboard. 1 cream, 2 sugars. Ava stared at him. "You remembered that." He leaned a hip against the desk. "I pay attention." A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised even her. It had been a long week. She had worked late Friday, spent most of Saturday doing laundry in a building with broken machines, called her mother on Sunday, and listened to 40 straight minutes of complaints about her aunt's new boyfriend. Ryan's simple kindness cut through all of that like light under a door. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know, that is what makes me generous." She shook her head. "You are impossible. Only before 10 in the morning." He glanced toward Damien's closed office. "How bad is he today?" Ava lowered her voice on instinct. "I have not spoken to him yet." Ryan followed her look and grimaced. "Guy walks through the building like he owns oxygen." She tried not to smile, failed, and looked down at the coffee to hide it. Ryan noticed anyway. "There it is," he said softly. "I was starting to think you forgot how." "How to what?" "Laugh." Ava lifted her eyes. There was no pressure in his expression, no arrogance, just warmth. A clean, straightforward interest that made her both grateful and uneasy because it asked her to step into a kind of ease she had never quite trusted. "I laugh," she said. "Not around here, you do not. Maybe this floor is not built for joy. Then that sounds like an architectural problem." This time she laughed for real. The sound floated out into the corridor, bright, unguarded, impossible to miss. From inside his office, Damien Kane looked up. He had been halfway through an email about port access contracts and a delayed shipment on the lake when the laugh reached him. It did not belong to the room. It did not belong to the building. It was too warm for all that steel and glass. Too alive. He rose before he thought about why. His hand paused on the office door. Mason, seated at the conference table with a legal file open in front of him, watched the change in his face. "Boss." Damien opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The sight that met him landed harder than it should have. Ava Bennett stood behind her desk with her head tipped back in laughter, one hand resting near the coffee cup, eyes soft in a way he had never seen. Ryan Foster leaned in close enough to suggest familiarity, close enough to suggest access. The scene was small, innocent even, and something vicious twisted through Damien's chest before he had a name for it. For one suspended beat, the floor held its breath. Ava felt it first as a shift in the air, the strange pressure of a room becoming aware of itself. Her smile faded. She turned. Damien stood 20 feet away, one hand in his coat pocket, eyes fixed on her. Not past her, not through her. On her, every nerve in her body lit at once. Mason stepped into the hall behind him and followed his gaze. He understood before anyone spoke. He always did. "Boss?" Damien's voice stayed level. "Who is that?" "Ryan Foster, security." Damien kept looking at Ava. "Get him off my floor." Mason moved immediately. Ryan straightened as the larger man approached. "Something I can help you with. Mr. Kane needs you downstairs." Ryan frowned. "Me?" "Yes." "Why?" Mason's expression did not change. "Because I said so." Ryan glanced past him toward Damien, then toward Ava. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by the first spark of something harder. Not fear. Not yet. Challenge, maybe. The kind men wore when they thought the rules would protect them. He picked up on the tension too late. "Sure," he said slowly. "I will catch you later, Ava." Before she could answer, Damien's voice cut through the corridor. "Miss Bennett." Her stomach dropped. He stood by the open office door, face unreadable. Inside, the floor around them dissolved into silence. Monitors glowed. Printers whirred in distant corners. No one moved. Ava could feel a dozen eyes avoiding the direct act of looking at her. Her palms went damp. She reached for the notepad out of pure reflex, though she had no idea why. Her shoes sounded too loud on the floor as she crossed the distance to his office. Passing Damien felt like stepping near an open flame. She smelled cedar and cold air clinging to his coat. Felt the weight of his gaze even after she moved beyond him. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed much louder than it was. Inside the office was warmer than the corridor, darker too. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the river and the winter pale of the city beyond. A long conference table occupied one side of the room. On the other stood Damien's desk, immaculate except for a laptop, a crystal glass of water, and 3 neatly aligned folders. Nothing in the space looked accidental. Ava remained standing until he told her to sit. He did not. Instead, he took off his coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and walked around the front of his desk with unhurried precision. He did not open a file, did not look at his phone. He was looking at her now in a way that made standing still feel suddenly impossible. "You seem distracted this morning." His voice was quiet. That made it worse. Ava tightened her grip on the notepad. "I have the revised agenda for 10 o'clock if you need it." "I did not ask about the agenda." Heat climbed into her face. "Then I am not sure what you are asking." His eyes dropped briefly to the cup in her hand and lifted again. "You were smiling." The accusation was so strange she almost forgot to be careful. "I am sorry." "You heard me?" Ava stared at him. He came around the desk fully now, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could no longer pretend this was a normal office conversation. "I have walked past that desk every day for a year," he said. "You say good morning. You hand me files. You do your work without making mistakes. And in all that time I have never heard you sound like that." She swallowed. "Like what?" "Happy." The word landed between them with surprising force. Ava tried for calm and only managed honesty. "Maybe no one gave me a reason." A flicker moved through his expression. Not anger. Something more dangerous because it looked too much like recognition. And he did. Ryan was just being nice. That is exactly the problem. Ava blinked. "With respect, Mr. Kane, I do not understand why this is any problem at all." His jaw tightened. He took another step, slow enough to be deliberate. "Because the first time I really look at you," he said, "each word measured, you are looking at another man like he matters." Her pulse stumbled. The office seemed to shrink around them. Every polished surface, every pane of glass, every dark, clean line of the room pulled tight around the force of that one sentence. She should have looked away. She did not. "Why would that matter to you?" For a second he said nothing. Something moved in his face, then subtle and brutal, as if the question had dragged a truth into the light before he was ready to look at it. When he answered, his voice was lower. "Because now I cannot stop noticing you." Ava's breath caught so sharply it hurt. He exhaled once through his nose, almost annoyed at himself. "You may go." The dismissal came too suddenly, like a door slamming after a gust of heat. She stood there another second, unable to tell whether she had imagined the entire exchange. But his gaze dropped to the notepad still clutched in her hand, and the spell cracked just enough for embarrassment to rush in. "Yes, sir," she said softly. She turned before he could see how badly her fingers were trembling. Out in the corridor, no one looked up directly. They did not need to. The silence itself had changed shape. Ava sat back down at her desk with all the mechanical precision of a woman trying not to come apart at the seams. She picked up the nearest file, opened it, and stared at a page without reading a single word. Across the hall, Mason emerged from the elevator alone. Ryan was gone. A minute later, Damien's office door opened. He walked past her on the way to a conference room expression, once again perfectly composed as if nothing at all had happened behind that closed door. But this time, just before he reached the end of her desk, he stopped. Ava's heart climbed into her throat. He looked down at the printed agenda in her hands. "Move legal to 11:30. Huxley will be late." Her voice almost failed her. "Yes, Mr. Kane." Then his eyes lifted to hers for one suspended beat. "Not long. Just enough." Then he kept walking. The touch of that glance stayed with her all day. By noon, she had convinced herself she was losing her mind. By 2, she had replayed every word he said often enough to hear them in the rhythm of the printer. By 4, she hated herself a little for how alive she felt. When she finally left the building, the sky had already darkened to that hard Chicago blue that came before snow. She kept her coat buttoned to her throat and walked with her head down against the wind, taking State Street toward the train. The city was all motion around her, taxis hissing through slush, steam rising from grates, office workers talking into headsets, someone laughing from inside a bright bar where the windows had fogged over. She should have felt ordinary again out there among strangers. She did not. His voice stayed with her the whole ride home. The apartment she rented in Lakeview was small enough that she could stand in the kitchen and touch the sink without taking a step. The radiator clicked all winter. One cabinet door never closed properly. The hallway smelled faintly of old cooking no matter how often management cleaned. Ava usually liked it because it was hers. Quiet, affordable, predictable. That night it felt too small for what had happened. She dropped her keys in the ceramic dish by the door, set her bag on the counter, and stood in the dark without turning on a light. Outside, headlights slid across the wall through the blinds. She could still see Damien standing in front of his desk, coat off control, slipping just enough to show the shape of something raw beneath it. Because the first time I really look at you, you are looking at another man like he matters. Ava closed her eyes. It was absurd, impossible, dangerous in a dozen ways she did not even want to list. He was her boss, a man with a reputation sharp enough to bleed through walls, a man who belonged to another world even when he was standing 3 feet away in an office with a skyline view. And yet, she touched her own mouth as if the memory of his voice had left something there. She did not sleep much. When she finally did drift off, she dreamed of glass hallways and dark eyes, and the impossible feeling of being seen after spending half a life invisible. The next morning, the city woke under a skin of fresh snow. Ava arrived 10 minutes early because routine felt like the closest thing to control. She rode the elevator up with 2 women from finance who stopped talking the second she stepped inside. One of them smiled too brightly. The other kept checking her phone. Ava felt the strange hum of attention around her before the doors even opened. Then they did, and she stopped cold. Her desk was gone. The lamp, the chair, her monitor, the stack of folders, the little succulent in its white pot, all of it. In the place where she had sat for a year, there was only polished floor and a clean rectangle in the carpet where her chair had been. For a second, Ava honestly thought she had stepped onto the wrong floor. Then the floor manager hurried toward her with the expression of a man about to deliver news he did not want attached to his name. "Miss Bennett," he said, lowering his voice, "Mr. Kane has reassigned your position." Ava stared at the empty space where her desk had been. To where? The man glanced toward the corner office, and inside, through the glass, she could already see a new workstation set near Damien Kane's desk. For a second, Ava forgot to breathe. The small desk stood to the right of his, close enough that he would only have to lift his eyes to find her. A monitor keyboard, a brass pen cup, 2 neatly stacked legal pads. Someone had even placed her succulent near the corner, as if that made any of this normal. The floor manager cleared his throat. "He asked that you come in as soon as you arrived." Of course he did. Ava tightened her grip on her bag strap and felt every gaze on the floor pretending not to follow her. A woman from Investor Relations paused too long at the copy machine. One of the junior analysts suddenly found something fascinating on his screen. Even the receptionist at the far end of the hall went still for half a beat. Ava crossed the corridor with her pulse beating far too high in her throat. When she knocked, Damien's voice came through the door in the same calm tone he used for board meetings and bad news. "Come in." She stepped inside. The office smelled faintly of cedar black coffee and whatever cologne he wore so lightly it was almost cruel. Morning light poured through the windows behind him, outlining his shoulders in pale winter gold. He was already at his desk jacket on tie perfect, reading something on a tablet as if moving her entire life 6 feet to the right had been no more significant than rescheduling a call. His eyes lifted. "Good morning, Ava." Not Miss Bennett. Ava stopped just inside the door. "Good morning." He set the tablet down. "Close the door." She did. The soft click of the latch made the room feel smaller. Ava looked at the workstation again, then back at him. "You moved my desk." Yes. The answer was so direct it nearly made her laugh, but there was nothing funny about the heat rising under her skin. "Why?" He leaned back in his chair and studied her with that unnervingly steady gaze of his. "Because I wanted you in here." That is not a reason. It is to me. Ava let out a breath through her nose and set her bag on the new desk without sitting. People are staring. They will survive. That is not what I meant. I know what you meant. His voice stayed even. You are worried people will talk. They already are. He gave the faintest inclination of his head, yes. She waited for an apology. Some gesture toward caution. Something that would make this feel less like the deliberate rearranging of a man's world around a woman he had just admitted he could not stop noticing. It did not come. You do not care? She asked. His gaze did not waver, no. Ava looked at him in disbelief. Then, with the same composure he might have used to approve a contract, he added, I would prefer they notice. A flush climbed into her cheeks before she could stop it. Damien. The name slipped out on instinct, and something dark and satisfied moved in his expression. Sit down, Ava. Her knees felt less reliable than she wanted them to, but she sat. The chair was still new enough to creak softly under her. Her old place outside had given her the comfort of distance. Here she could see the texture of his tie, the fine scar near his wrist when he rolled back his cuff, the slight shadow under his eyes that said he had not slept enough. For a year she had learned him in fragments. This was different. This was being placed directly in the path of him. He returned to the tablet on his desk as if giving her a moment to absorb it all. You will handle all internal scheduling from here, he said. Any document for me comes through you first. Mason will bring security updates directly. Legal will stop bypassing you. If anyone has a problem with the arrangement, they can speak to me. Ava stared. You had this planned? Yes. When? His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Yesterday. Yesterday. She thought of his voice. The way he had looked at her after Ryan made her laugh. The strange intensity in that office. She thought of going home with her skin still carrying the memory of being seen, and lay awake half the night trying to convince herself she had imagined half of it. Apparently she had imagined too little. He glanced toward the folders already placed on her desk. You have the updated acquisition packet for 11. The donor meeting moved to 3, and Huxley is still late. Ava blinked at the smoothness of the transition. You are just going to act like this is normal. For me it is. For you, she repeated. I had a desk outside yesterday. You have one inside today. That is not an explanation. Damien set his pen down with deliberate care. No, it is a decision. Ava held his gaze. You make it sound like those are the same thing. In my world they usually are. That should have annoyed her more than it did. Instead, it made something in her tighten and warm all at once. He was impossible, arrogant, unyielding, more dangerous to her peace of mind than any man had a right to be. And still seated 6 feet from him with the city opening wide behind his shoulders, she felt alive in a way she had no practice handling. The phone on his desk rang. He answered in Italian. Ava froze for half a second at the shift in him. The language rolled out low and fluid, transforming his voice into something darker, older, sharper around the edges. She could not understand much, only fragments, but she understood tone, control, irritation, quiet threat disguised as conversation. By the time he ended the call, he was once again the polished CEO at the center of a spotless office. He looked up and found her watching him. What? She shook her head too quickly. Nothing. One dark brow lifted. You were staring. Heat flared in her face. So were you yesterday. A silence followed that did not feel empty. Then very slowly Damien leaned back in his chair and gave her a look that made her glad she was sitting. Yes, he said. I was. A knock on the door broke the moment. A junior assistant stepped inside carrying 2 folders and stopped dead when she saw Ava seated inside the office. Her eyes flicked from Ava to Damien, then back again. Mr. Kane Legal sent the revised. Leave it with Ava, he said. The girl hesitated just long enough to betray the speed at which this was already spreading through the building, then crossed the room and set the folders on Ava's desk. Of course, she was gone in seconds. Ava looked down at the paperwork, then at Damien. You did that on purpose? Yes. Again. Yes. A laugh almost escaped her before she could stop it. It came out instead as a short breath of disbelief. You are unbelievable. And yet you are still here. The words settled low and dangerous between them. Ava forced herself to open the top folder if only to have something to do with her hands. For the next hour, she worked because she had no other choice. Scheduled calls, flagged issues, sent calendar updates. The familiar rhythm helped, but not enough. Every time she forgot where she was and looked up, there he was. Damien at his desk, speaking in clipped tones into his headset, reading contracts, signing his name with that same exacting precision he seemed to bring to everything. He did not fidget, did not waste motion. Even his stillness had force. Twice she caught him looking at her. The first time he made no attempt to hide it. The second time, neither did she. By 10:30, the floor outside was moving at its usual pace again, but the tension had changed shape. People came to the office with files and questions and left with one more thing to whisper about. Ava could feel it without hearing words. The double takes, the almost polite curiosity, the sharpened awareness that comes when a hierarchy shifts and everyone smells the change before they understand it. At 11, Mason came in carrying a thick black folder and paused beside Damien's desk. Meeting on 2 is moved. Damien did not look up from the contract he was reading. Why, traffic on the west side. Their council is stuck. Damien nodded once. Fine. Mason's attention shifted to Ava for the briefest moment. It was not rude. If anything, it was assessing, as though he were recalibrating a floor plan that no longer matched the room. "Morning, Miss Bennett," Ava Damien said without lifting his eyes. Mason blinked once. Then the corner of his mouth moved in the smallest hint of amusement. Ava. She could not think of a response that did not sound flustered, so she settled for a polite nod and looked back at the email on her screen. When Mason left, Damien signed the last page in front of him and set the contract aside. "You are frowning at your computer. I am answering 3 messages from people who suddenly seem confused about where to send things. Send them to you." I gathered that. A beat passed. Then he said, "You're angry." Ava let out a quiet, incredulous sound. "You moved me into your office without warning and turned me into the center of a story half this floor will be talking about by lunch." "Only half." She looked up sharply and he held her gaze with a composure so dry it was almost wicked. For one helpless second she fought a smile. That made his expression soften in a way so subtle she might have missed it if she had not spent a year studying the spaces between his moods. "You think this is funny?" "I think you are." Ava stared at him. "That is the first nice thing you have said to me." "No, it is the first one you believed." The words struck deeper than he could have known. Or maybe he did know. That was the problem. Ava looked back down before her face gave too much away. "You should be working." "I am. You are bothering me." Also true. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling and hated how good it felt. Hated that this impossible version of him existed, sharp and watchful and faintly amused by her, as if he had stepped through a wall and found her waiting there all along. At noon, someone from accounting brought lunch orders to the office suite. Damien did not ask where she wanted hers delivered. He simply told them in here. Ava glanced up from the report in her hands. "I can eat at my old desk area." His eyes stayed on the page he was reading. "No, that is not a reason either. It does not need to be." She set the report down. "You cannot just keep saying no to everything." He finally looked at her. "Watch me." The pulse at the base of her throat gave one traitorous jump. Lunch arrived on a rolling cart. Salads, grilled fish, sparkling water, coffee. Everything arranged with the careful anonymity of luxury service, as if food simply appeared where power was expected. The catering attendant left quickly, trying and failing not to look curious. Damien moved to the small round table near the windows and nodded once to the chair opposite him. Ava joined him because arguing in front of service staff seemed worse than compliance. Below them, Chicago moved under a low white sky. The river looked like dark glass. Cars slid over bridges in tidy lines. Somewhere beyond the buildings, the lake was hiding under winter haze. For a while, they ate in quiet. Ava had always imagined what it might feel like to sit across from him, to have his attention directed at her without interruption. In her imagination, it had been elegant, maybe even graceful. In reality, it felt like trying to drink water while standing too near the edge of something deep. She set down her fork. "How many people do you think have already made up a version of this in their heads?" "All of them. And that does not bother you." "Number." "Why?" Damien took a slow sip of water before answering. "Because I spent a year walking past you." Ava went still. He set the glass down. "That was my mistake. I do not intend to repeat it by pretending this matters less than it does." Less than it does. The room sharpened around her. She looked at him across the table at the hard line of his shoulders and the infuriating steadiness of his face, and wondered how a man could say something so intimate in a tone that remained almost formal. You do not know what this is, she said softly. No. His gaze held hers. Then why does seeing another man near you make me want him removed from the building? Ava's breath caught. For the first time since she stepped into the office that morning, Damien looked less like a CEO making controlled decisions and more like a man standing on the edge of an impulse he had not yet decided whether to trust. He leaned back in his chair, but his eyes stayed on her. You asked yesterday why it mattered. She said nothing. Now you know. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her water glass. That is not fair. His expression changed. No, because I have been trying not to feel things about you for a year. The silence that followed was absolute. The city kept moving beyond the glass. Somewhere in the office suite, a phone rang and stopped. But inside that room, time seemed to narrow into the space between his breathing and hers. Damien's voice, when it came, was low enough to make her pulse stutter. Say that again. Ava could not believe she had said it once. Heat crawled up her throat into her face. I should not have. Say it again. She looked down at the white tablecloth at her own hand, resting too tightly against the edge of the table. Then she made herself meet his eyes. I said I have been trying not to feel things about you for a year. For one suspended second, Damien went perfectly still. Then he stood. Ava's chair scraped softly against the floor as she rose two more from instinct than intention. He crossed the space between them with the slow certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome before he took the first step. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, close enough that the air between them changed. A year, he repeated. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice. His hand lifted, hesitated for the briefest fraction of a second near her face, then settled against her jaw with a care so at odds with his reputation it nearly undid her. I'm going to apologize for something, he said. Ava's heart was beaten so hard she wondered if he could feel it in the pulse under her skin. For what? For not seeing you sooner. The tenderness of it hit harder than the possessiveness ever had. She should have stepped back. Instead, she whispered Damien, and he kissed her. No warning. No gentleness borrowed from hesitation. The kiss was deep and immediate, and starved of pretense, the kind that arrives after too much restraint and refuses to apologize for the damage. Ava's breath caught against his mouth. Her hand rose of its own accord and found the front of his shirt fingers curling into expensive fabric, as if it were the only steady thing left in the room. For one dizzying instant she forgot where they were. Forgot the office, the windows, the city, the people just beyond the door. There was only the slide of his hand to the back of her neck, the heat of him, the impossible reality of finally being touched by the man she had wanted in silence for so long that wanting had begun to feel like a private language with no translation. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing harder than the room allowed. His forehead hovered near hers for the briefest moment before he stepped away. Ava stared at him, lips parted, pulse wild. This cannot happen here, she whispered. His eyes did not leave her mouth. It already did. The bluntness of that nearly made her laugh and cry at once. She pressed trembling fingertips to her lower lip. People will know. I know. You say that like you do not care if the whole building talks. Damien's gaze finally lifted to hers. They can talk. Ava searched his face for some sign of uncertainty and found none. Only intensity. Possession held tightly under polish. A resolve that frightened her a little because it felt larger than impulse. She took a shaky breath. Why now? His answer came without pause. Because yesterday I heard you laugh with another man and realized I was already too late to lie to myself. Something inside her softened so suddenly it hurt. A knock sounded at the door. They both froze. Damien's entire posture shifted in the space of a heartbeat. He stepped back, adjusted his cuffs once, and by the time he said, "Come in," he was once again composed enough to terrify a boardroom. Ava turned toward the window and tried to recover her face. Mason entered with a tablet in hand and stopped after one step. His gaze moved from Damien to Ava, and then very carefully to a point slightly above both their heads. Am I interrupting? No, Damien said. Mason did not look convinced, but years around dangerous men had clearly trained him to survive on selective belief. There is an issue with the security audit. Ryan Foster is on this floor again. Ava turned too fast. Ryan. Mason nodded once. Says he is here to review camera placement. Damien's expression cooled by several degrees. He is not assigned to this level. That was my understanding. Ava found her voice. He probably just wanted to make sure I was okay. Damien looked at her for a beat that felt longer than it was. Then he said to Mason, "Let him in." Mason's brows lifted slightly, but he left without comment. Ava turned back. You do not need to do this. Do what? Treat him like a threat. He is interested in you. She folded her arms partly because she was annoyed and partly because her body still remembered the kiss too clearly. That is not a crime, no, Damien said. It is an irritation. Before she could answer, Ryan appeared in the open doorway. He looked first at Ava, then at Damien, then at the lunch table near the windows and whatever remained in the air that even a less observant man would have sensed. His expression changed. Ava, he said carefully. You good? She opened her mouth, but Damien answered first. Mr. Foster, you continue to appear where I have not requested you. Ryan straightened. With respect, sir, I came to check on her. You have done that. Ryan's eyes flicked to Ava again. There was concern there. Also hurt. Also a dawning understanding that made the room feel sharper around all three of them. She can answer for herself, he said. Damien's gaze hardened. Can she? Ava exhaled quietly. Ryan. He looked at her. Did you ask to be moved in here? The question landed harder than he knew. Ava held his eyes and searched for the kind man who had brought her coffee, who had seen loneliness and answered it with ease. He deserved honesty. Maybe not all of it, but enough. I am okay, she said softly. You do not have to worry. Ryan absorbed that. He glanced once toward Damien, and something resigned settled behind his expression. Right, he said after a moment. Got it. Damien spoke before he could leave. From now on, anything involving Ava goes through this office. Ryan's jaw tightened. That is not really your call outside corporate operations. The room chilled. When Damien stepped forward, he did it without haste. That made it worse. In this building, he said quietly, it is. Ryan held his stare for a second too long, then gave the smallest nod a man can give without it counting as agreement. He looked back at Ava one last time. Take care of yourself. She nodded. Thank you. Then he was gone. The silence he left behind was immediate and heavy. Ava turned to Damien. That was unnecessary. No, he said. It was not. You embarrassed him. He should learn faster. He was being kind. Damien came closer. Not enough to touch, enough to shift the room around his body. He wants something from you. Her breath sharpened. And what do you want? The question hung there full and dangerous. Then Damien answered with a calm that only deepened the force of it. Everything. Ava's pulse knocked hard against her throat. For a second, neither of them moved. Then the intercom on his desk buzzed. Damien did not look away from her when he pressed the button. Yes, Mason's voice came through flatter than usual. I need a word. Now. Yes. Something in the single syllable changed the air. Damien stepped back at last. Come in. Mason entered and closed the door behind him. His usual composure held, but only just. He carried no file this time, no tablet, just tension. His eyes flicked once toward Ava, then back to Damien. Someone has been asking questions downstairs. Damien's face went still. About what? Not what. Mason paused. Who? Ava felt the room tighten around her before either man said her name. Mason did not make her wait long. About Ava. The office went silent in a way Ava had never heard before. Not the ordinary quiet of expensive rooms and important people. This was different. Tighter. Heavier. Like the air itself had learned there was danger in it and was waiting to see who moved first. Damien did not react outwardly. That made the shift in him even more unnerving. He stood still beside his desk, one hand resting lightly against the polished edge, his face unreadable except for the hardening line of his mouth. What kind of questions? He asked. Mason glanced at Ava again, then chose his words with care. Name. Address. Schedule. Whether she still lives alone. The blood drained from her face. Damien's voice stayed low. Who asked? A man who did not belong in the lobby. Paid cash for visitor parking. Used a fake company name. Security ran his image after he left. Nothing clean came back. Ava's fingers tightened around the back of her chair until her knuckles ached. This could just be gossip. Both men looked at her. She hated the way her own voice sounded too thin, too hopeful, like someone trying to outrun a fact with denial. Mason said nothing. Damien did. Number. One word. Quiet. Absolute. Ava's heart began to pound. Damien turned to Mason. How far did he get? Not far. Front desk stonewalled him. Then he tried a second approach downstairs near loading access. Mason paused. When our people pushed, he left fast. Our people, Ava repeated softly. Neither man answered that. Damien's eyes came back to hers. In them, she saw the full shape of the problem before anyone explained it. Not office gossip. Not harmless curiosity. Something older, sharper, the kind of attention that did not stop at names. "Tell me exactly what this means," she said. Mason looked to Damien. Damien held her gaze for a beat, then crossed the room and pressed the intercom button on his desk. No interruptions. No calls unless it is Shaw or Russo. Or, "Yes, sir," came the answer from outside. He released the button and looked at Mason. "Close the outer glass." Mason moved, immediately shutting the privacy partition that turned the clear walls to a smoked gray. The city blurred. The office became a sealed box suspended above the river cut off from the floor outside. Only then did Damien speak. "It means someone noticed." Ava stared at him. "Noticed what?" His jaw tightened. "That you matter to me." The words landed harder than they should have because there was no heat in them now. No thrill. Just a cold truth delivered by a man who understood the price of attachment better than anyone she had ever known. She shook her head once. "That is not enough to go on." "In your world, maybe not." His voice remained level. "In mine, it is more than enough." Ava searched his face for exaggeration and found none. Mason shifted his weight near the door. "There is one more thing." Damien looked at him. Mason reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a plain white envelope on the desk. No logo, no return address. Just thick paper folded once. Damien picked it up without hurry, but Ava saw the change in his hands. Not a tremor. Never that. Something subtler. The stillness of a man forcing precision onto his own body. He opened the envelope and slid out a photograph. For 1 second he did not move at all. Then his mouth turned to stone. Ava's pulse skidded. "What is it?" Damien did not answer. She came around the desk before either man could stop her and looked down. It was her, Ava, leaving her apartment building the night before. Blue wool coat, hair tied back, purse over one shoulder, one hand tucked into her pocket against the cold. The photo had been taken from across the street under a street lamp she passed every night without noticing. Her breath left her all at once. The picture was close enough to see her face clearly, to know exactly where she lived, to know what time she came home. Ava stepped back as if the paper itself might burn her. "Oh my God." Damien folded the photograph once and set it down very carefully. "What did the note say?" she asked. He looked at her. She knew then that he had read something besides the image and had decided in the space of a heartbeat that she should not see it. What did it say? His silence stretched just long enough to sharpen her fear into anger. "Damien," Mason answered when Damien did not. It said "pretty girl." Ava turned. Mason's face was set in a hard, professional calm, but there was something dark behind it now. Disgust, maybe, or the grim knowledge of where men like this tended to go once they believed they had found a weakness. "That is all she asked." "No," Damien said. His voice was colder than she had ever heard it. It said "pretty girl" for a careful man. Ava felt the room tilt under her. The sentence was so simple, so controlled. Somehow that made it worse. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. They were not trying to frighten her. Not really. They were trying to measure him. "How long have they been watching me?" Damien's stare stayed fixed on her face as if he could hold the panic still by sheer force of will. "I do not know." "Who are they?" He glanced at Mason, out. Mason hesitated. "Boss, now." Mason gave one short nod and left, closing the inner door behind him. The office seemed smaller without him in it. Ava turned back to Damien. "Tell me." He came around the desk, slowly. The photo still resting on the polished wood between them like proof of a world she had only brushed against before today. Up close he looked even more controlled than usual, which only made the threat underneath him more visible. "There is a crew on the south side," he said. "Old money, old blood, old habits. The Bishop outfit. Years ago they learned that direct pressure on me is expensive, so they started looking for softer ways in." Ava's throat tightened. "Through people." "Yes." She stared at him. "And now that is me." For the first time since Mason walked in, something almost like regret crossed his face. "Yes." The office went very quiet. Ava wrapped both arms around herself and looked away toward the smoked glass wall where the city was now only shapes and light. She should have felt surprised. Horrified. Some part of her did. But beneath it was something even harder to admit. A thin line of understanding. This was why he had stopped pretending so fast. Why the possessiveness had sharpened overnight into action. Why moving her desk had not felt impulsive to him but necessary. Because the second he let the world see, he cared the world had answered. "When did you know?" she asked softly. That you were in danger. No, she turned back. That I could be. His eyes held hers. The moment I heard you laugh with him, Ava blinked. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see fatigue at the edges of his face now, and anger beneath that, and under both of those, something that looked too much like self-disgust. I spent a year keeping distance for a reason, he said. I should have kept it. The words hurt more than she expected. You kissed me. Yes. You moved me into your office. Yes. You told me you were done pretending. He exhaled once sharp through his nose. I was. Ava's chest tightened. So which is it? You want me near you or you want me gone? His gaze darkened. Do not mistake regret for doubt. The answer came with such force that her breath caught. He lifted one hand and touched her jaw, not possessive this time, just steady, grounding. I want you where I can keep you alive. The room seemed to draw in around that sentence. Ava looked up at him and for one suspended second saw the whole man at once. The dangerous one. The jealous one. The one who had kissed her like restraint had run out. The one who understood exactly what had been unleashed by that kiss and hated himself for how little it changed what he wanted. Her voice dropped. What happens now? You do not go home tonight. She pulled back from his hand. Damien, number. That is not your decision to make alone. It is now. Anger flared clean and hot through the fear. You do not get to order me out of my own life because someone sent a picture. He took another step, and this time there was no mistaking the iron in him. When it comes to whether men with cameras and bad intentions know your address, yes, I do. Ava's chin lifted. I am not one of your employees when it comes to this. No. His eyes locked on hers. You are much worse. The breath she drew felt unsteady. He did not soften. I cannot secure that apartment fast enough. I cannot trust its entry points. I cannot guarantee the street below it. Until I know who sent this and how many hands it has passed through, you do not sleep there. Ava shook her head once more to clear it, then to disagree. You are asking me to disappear. I am asking you to stay under my roof. That is not simpler. It is safer. He said it like a fact already signed and filed. Maybe that was why she wanted to resist him even more. Because some part of her knew he was right, and another part refused to let fear make every choice for her. She folded her arms tighter. I have clothes there, my things. I will have them brought. I do not want strangers in my apartment. His voice remained maddeningly calm. Then I will send Mason with you. Number. His expression changed at once. No, I am not walking in and out of my building surrounded by men with earpieces like a hostage. You are not a hostage. Then stop talking to me like one. The crack in her voice at the end was small, but it was there. It altered something in him. The anger did not leave his face, but it shifted shape, became less sharp at the edges, more human. He looked at her for a long beat, then reached for the photograph again and held it up between two fingers. They know your coat, he said quietly. They know your door. They know the route you take home. You want honesty, Ava. Here it is. I do not care whether this feels fair. I care whether you wake up tomorrow. The truth of that struck hard enough to silence her. Outside the smoked glass, the city kept moving. Inside, she could hear nothing but the low hum of ventilation and her own breathing. Finally, she said, If I go with you, this gets worse. A muscle moved in his jaw. For me, yes. For us, his gaze sharpened. Do not use that word unless you mean it. She had not even realized she had. Heat and fear and something far more dangerous all tangled together inside her. Fine, she said softly, for whatever this is. Damien stared at her a moment longer, then placed the photograph face down on the desk. I will decide what they see, he said. Not them. She should have challenged that too. The certainty, the possession under it. Instead, she felt the strange, frightening comfort of being inside a sentence he had already built around her. He pressed the intercom. Mason. The reply came instantly. Yes. Bring the car to the private entrance in 20 minutes. 2 in front, 1 behind. And send Lena in here. Done. Ava frowned. Who is Lena? My head of domestic staff. The words made this feel even more unreal. Domestic staff. You will need a room ready. A room. At his place. She had spent a year loving him from 10 feet outside a closed office door. Now the same man was arranging where she would sleep as if the shape of her life had already shifted, and all that remained was for her to catch up. A short knock sounded. The door opened and a woman in her 50s stepped inside. Silver dark hair pulled into a smooth twist-tailored black dress, the composed face of someone who ran complex things without ever raising her voice. "Mr. Kane, Lena Ava will be staying at the Gold Coast residence." The woman took that in with a glance so brief it almost did not register. Not surprise, exactly. More recalibration. "Of course," she said. "Does Miss Bennett have any allergies or preferences I should know about?" Ava blinked, entirely unprepared for how ordinary the question sounded inside the middle of this disaster. "No allergies." Lena nodded once. "I will prepare the East Guest Suite." Damien's eyes moved to Ava. "No." Lena paused. He did not look away from Ava when he spoke. "The room next to mine." A pulse of heat went through her so quickly it almost made her angry. Lena's expression did not change, though some subtle understanding passed through her gaze. "Very good." She left. Ava stared at Damien. "You did not have to say that in front of her." "Yes," he said, "I did." She let out a breath that was half disbelief, half nerves. "Do you ever get tired of deciding things for everyone?" "Rarely." And there it was again, that dry edge that somehow made him more dangerous, not less. The drive out of the tower happened too fast. 1 minute Ava was in the private elevator with Damien and Mason, descending through a building she had entered as an employee and was now leaving as something else she did not know how to name. The next, she was being guided through a side exit she had only ever seen from the inside, winter air cutting across her face as a black SUV pulled up under a covered stone arch. Mason opened the rear door. Damien gestured for her to get in first. She slid onto cool leather and watched the city through tinted glass as the door shut and sealed her inside with him. For the first few blocks, neither of them spoke. Chicago moved around them in wet gray layers. Snow melting at the edges of curbs. Men in dark coats hurrying past restaurants already lit for dinner. Lake wind chasing paper cups down the gutter. The city felt ordinary in all the ways it had that morning, and entirely changed in every way that mattered. Ava looked down at her own hands in her lap. "Do they know who I am?" "Not enough. That is not comforting. It is not meant to be." She turned to him. "You really think this is that serious?" His profile was cut clean against the window, all hard lines and stillness. "I know it is." The certainty in his voice left no room to pretend otherwise. She looked away again and watched a bus drag light through slush at an intersection. "I should be terrified." He turned his head then. "You are." Ava swallowed. "Maybe." "Good." She frowned. "Good. Yes." His gaze held hers. Fear keeps people alive. Something about the brutal simplicity of it made her laugh under her breath, though there was little humor in the sound. He watched her mouth. "What? You really know how to comfort a woman." The corner of his mouth shifted. "I am not trying to comfort you. No, you are just kidnapping me politely." This time he almost smiled. Almost. The expression was so brief she might have missed it if she had not been looking straight at him. For one flicker of a moment, the tension in the car loosened. Not enough to disappear. Just enough to remind her that under the threat and the control and the fear, there was still the man who had looked at her across a lunch table and admitted too much with one sentence. The Gold Coast residence stood behind a limestone facade on a quiet street lined with winter bare trees and old money. The building did not advertise itself. No flashy doorman, no brass plaque, just discreet security at the entrance and windows too dark to read from the sidewalk. Inside everything was warmth and shadow, dark wood floors, soft amber lamps, art that looked expensive because it was. A living room framed by glass that opened onto the black sheen of the lake beyond the city lights. The place felt masculine without being cold, controlled without feeling empty. A home built by a man who trusted clean lines more than comfort, then quietly purchased both. Ava stood just inside the entry and turned in a slow circle. "You live here." Damien removed his gloves and set them on a console table. "I do?" She looked back at him, alone. His eyes settled on her face. "Not tonight." The answer sent a visible warmth up her throat before she could stop it. Lena appeared soundlessly from a side hallway. "Your room is ready." Ava followed her upstairs with a small overnight case already waiting on the bed, brought faster than seemed possible. The room next to Damien's was larger than her entire apartment. Cream walls, a fireplace, a bathroom in veined gray stone. Fresh clothes laid out in neutral tones that somehow matched her size closely enough to feel invasive. Lena noticed her looking. "I had one of the store's send options. Mr. Kane dislikes delay." Of course he did. After Lena left, Ava stood at the edge of the bed and let the silence gather around her. Through the windows, she could see the lake as a dark, endless plain, city lights scattered across it like broken jewelry. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt something more dangerous. Held. Later, after she showered and changed into a soft cream sweater and dark lounge pants that were not hers, she found Damien in the kitchen with his phone in one hand and a file spread open on the counter. He looked up the second she entered. Some men had to work to make a room feel charged. Damien never did. All he had to do was exist inside it. "You ate?" he asked. "A little." He nodded toward the covered plate on the island. "Eat more." She almost argued on reflex, then caught herself and sat. For a while, he took calls in a low voice while she picked at pasta she could barely taste. Names passed between him and whoever was on the line. Addresses, times. One conversation shifted into Italian and darkened the room, even without volume. By the time he hung up the plate in front of her, had gone cold. She set down her fork. "How much of your life sounds like that?" He looked at her from across the island, one hand braced on the marble. Too much. The honesty of it surprised her. He came around the counter, then, slow deliberate, and stopped in front of her chair. "You should sleep." Ava tipped her head back to meet his eyes. "Do you?" "Number. Because of me." The silence after that was answer enough. His hand lifted and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was so gentle it made something ache low in her chest. "You were invisible because I made sure of it," he said quietly. "I thought distance was enough." Ava searched his face, and now, his thumb touched the edge of her jaw. "Now I know better." He bent and kissed her. Not like the office. Not starved, not frantic. This kiss was slower, deeper, threaded through with fatigue and anger and restraint stretched painfully thin. Ava rose from the chair without deciding to and leaned into him, her hands finding his shirt, the warm, steady strength of him under crisp cotton. One of his hands slid to the back of her neck. The other settled at her waist and held there as if confirming she was real and still in reach. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "You need sleep," he said again, voice rougher now. "So do you." He gave a low exhale that might have been the shadow of a laugh. "I will work first." Ava should have gone upstairs. Instead, she lingered one more second in the shelter of his nearness, then stepped away before wanting could make her reckless again. In her room, the sheets were too soft, the silence too expensive, the whole place too far from the life she had woken in that morning. She lay on her side, facing the dark window, and listened to the distant hush of the lake, trying to tell herself she could still turn this into something temporary. Below her, somewhere in the apartment, a man she loved and should never have touched was still awake, still making calls, still turning the city over with careful hands until he found who had sent the picture. Much later, sleep only half there. Ava woke to the faint sound of his voice carrying up from the floor below. Not loud, not soft either, just clear enough for one sentence to reach her through the quiet house. "If they touch her," Damien said, "I bury them." The words followed Ava into sleep and stayed with her through the night like the echo of a storm moving just beyond the walls. When morning came, Chicago was wrapped in a gray light that made the lake look endless and cold. Ava woke in a bed that still did not feel real under linen sheets too soft for a woman who had spent most of her life measuring comfort by whether the radiator worked in January. For a few quiet seconds, she forgot where she was. Then she smelled cedar and coffee somewhere down the hall. Then she remembered. She pushed herself up and sat there with the blanket gathered in her lap, listening to the hush of a home built high above the city. No neighbors fighting through thin walls. No buses groaning outside her window. No footsteps in the hall. Just silence. Rich, controlled, expensive silence. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like being held in the center of something vast and dangerous that had closed around her overnight. She dressed in one of the sweaters Lena had set out soft cream cashmere that would have cost more than her monthly groceries and braided her hair loosely over one shoulder before stepping into the hall. The door to Damien's room stood half open, the bed untouched. She followed the smell of coffee downstairs and found him in the kitchen with his back to her, one hand braced against the counter, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking Italian again. Even without understanding the words, she knew the tone. It was colder than business and quieter than anger. The voice of a man who did not need volume to make another person imagine consequences. The sleeves of his black shirt were rolled to the forearms. A file lay open beside his coffee. Photos, names, building plans. A marked map of streets on the south side. He heard her before she made a sound. He ended the call, set the phone down, and turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Something shifted in his face, then, not softness exactly, but the closest version of it she had seen on him. The sharpness did not leave his eyes. It just lowered enough for the man beneath it to show through. "You slept. A little." He studied her as if checking for fractures no one else could see. "You should have woken me if you needed anything." Ava glanced toward the untouched coffee on the island. "Did you sleep at all?" "Number." The answer did not surprise her. The calm way he said it did. She moved farther into the room. "You were working." "Yes." "That is one word for it?" His mouth shifted faintly. "You were listening." "I heard enough." His expression changed at once. The brief, almost warmth disappeared behind something harder, more guarded. "You should not have." Ava folded her arms across herself, not out of anger, but to hold in the unease still moving under her skin. "Do not tell me to stay blind after dragging me into your world." He went still. The city beyond the windows looked pale and distant, all towers and low clouds and winter light, as though the violence hiding under its surface belonged to another place entirely. Inside the kitchen, the air tightened. "You want honesty," Damien said at last. "Here it is. This world stains everything near it." Ava met his gaze. "I am already near it. Near me." The correction landed like a hand at the base of her throat. He stepped toward the island and closed the file with quiet finality. "That makes it worse." She looked at the black folder under his hand. "What did you find?" "Enough. That is not an answer. It is the one you are getting." Frustration flashed through her. "You cannot keep deciding what I am allowed to know." His eyes lifted to hers. "Watch me." The answer should have made her angry. Instead, it brought back the memory of his hand at her jaw and his mouth on hers in the office and all the impossible heat of being wanted by a man who looked at the world like a battlefield and had suddenly decided she was the only thing in it worth losing control over. She hated that those memories still lived alongside fear, hated that she could feel them all at once. Lena entered a moment later with breakfast on a tray, and the smooth timing of someone who knew exactly when a conversation had reached a point where food might keep it from becoming a fight. She set down coffee for Ava, black espresso for Damien, fruit eggs toast, and left without comment. Ava stared at the spread. "Does everyone in your life know how to appear before things break?" "Yes," he said. "You trained them. I selected them." Something in that almost made her smile, but she was too tired and too restless for it to fully form. They ate in a silence that was not comfortable but no longer edged enough to cut. Damien took 2 more calls during breakfast. Mason came in, once spoke to him low and fast near the windows, and left again with a glance Ava could not quite read. Respect, certainly. Concern, too, maybe. Not for Damien. For her. That, more than anything, reminded her she had crossed some line and did not know how to step back. By noon, the apartment had become a machine. Men came and went through the private entrance below. Phones rang. Security updates passed through the kitchen in quiet fragments. Routes, times, a parking garage, an abandoned storefront, a vehicle description. The more Ava heard, the more she understood the terrifying efficiency of Damien's world. Nothing in it moved without purpose. Nothing happened slowly once he decided it mattered. And she mattered. That knowledge should have felt romantic. Instead, it sat in her chest like a live wire. Around 1, while Damien was in his office with Mason and another man she had not met, Ava stood by the window in the living room and looked down at Lake Shore Drive, cutting silver and black through the city. She had been standing there long enough to stop seeing traffic as individual cars when his phone, the one he had left on the side table near the sofa, lit up. She did not mean to look. The screen flashed a name she knew. Ryan Foster. Ava stared. The ringing stopped after 3 beats. Then a message banner appeared. "Heard some things. Just checking if you are okay." Her chest tightened. She picked up the phone before she could think better of it and stood there with it in her hand, caught between guilt and gratitude. Ryan had been kind to her before any of this. Before Damien noticed her. Before being near her had become dangerous. He was part of the old world, the one where kindness came with coffee, and concern not men with guns and maps spread across marble counters. She should have put the phone down. Instead, she typed back, "I am okay, thank you." There was no answer right away. just the faint hum of heat through the apartment and the distant low voices from Damien's office. When Ryan finally replied, the words appeared one line at a time. "Be careful, Ava." She stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Then she set the phone back exactly where it had been. She was still standing there when Damien stepped out of the office. He stopped the second he saw her face. "What?" Ava turned too quickly. "Nothing." His gaze moved to the phone on the table, then back to her. "Who?" She knew better than to lie. "Ryan." Damien's expression went flat, and he asked if I was okay. "And you answered." It was not a question. Ava swallowed. "Yes." He said nothing. That was worse. The silence seemed to alter the shape of the whole room. She could feel him thinking not as a jealous man now, but as something colder, measuring, calculating, filing away one more risk point in a world already full of them. It was only a message, she said. He came closer, not fast, not threatening. That would have been easier to resist. This was something else. Controlled enough to make refusal feel almost childish. "In my world," he said quietly, "there is no such thing as only a message." Ava looked up at him, exhausted by the pressure of every sentence turning into a test she did not know how to pass. "I am allowed to answer someone who is worried about me." "Yes." The answer caught her off guard. Then he added, "You are not allowed to underestimate what men do when they think they still have access to you." She stared. Something hot and offended rose in her chest. "Ryan is not like that." His eyes darkened. "You do not know what men are like when they believe they have been replaced." The words held more than jealousy. Something older, harder. Experience sharpened into certainty. Ava opened her mouth, then closed it again. He exhaled once, and some of the steel in him eased, if only a fraction. "I am not blaming you. It feels like it. I am blaming the fact that everyone with eyes suddenly knows where to aim." That left her with nothing to say. The rest of the afternoon passed in strange, suspended quiet. Damien worked. Ava tried to read and failed. She wandered the apartment twice, every room reminding her that this was not a hiding place made for guests. It was his. The books on the shelves, the dark tailored coats in the hall closet, the crystal decanter untouched in the office, the weight bench in a private room off the hall. Small evidence of a life that had always existed just out of sight. After sunset, the city went black and gold beyond the windows. Lena served dinner in the dining room and left them to it. Damien ate little. Ava drank more wine than she usually would and felt it warm her nerves without quieting them. At 10:47, Damien stood from the table. "One call," he said. Ava looked up. "That is what you said last night. This one really is one call. Your version of one is unreliable." A shadow of amusement touched his mouth. "Stay here." He went downstairs to the lower office level, leaving her alone with candlelight, half a glass of wine, and the silence of a city that never really slept. For a few minutes she stayed where she was, listening to the faint hush of heat in the vents and the muted movement of traffic below. Then she carried her glass into the kitchen, set it down untouched, and walked barefoot into the living room. The apartment felt different at night. Larger, more watchful. The windows reflected her back at herself, a pale shape in soft cream clothes, standing inside a fortress built by a man who knew exactly how many threats lived in his world, and had still somehow let her become part of it. Her phone vibrated on the side table, not Damien's this time. Her own finally returned to her after security had screened it that morning. "Ryan again. Just wanted to know you are really all right." Ava looked at the message, throat tight. She typed slowly. "Things are complicated." His reply came almost instantly. "Yeah, he is not exactly the kind of man people walk away from easy." Ava closed her eyes for 1 second. Before she could decide whether to answer, she heard it. A dull, heavy sound from the hall outside the apartment. Not a knock. Not an elevator chime. A thud. She froze. The glass in her hand trembled once before she set it down. Silence followed. Thick and wrong. "Damien." No answer. Her pulse leapt. Another sound came sharper this time. A scrape. Then a low male voice she did not recognize. Another voice answering it. Too close. Too many. Every part of her body went cold at once. She backed away from the window and moved toward the corridor leading to the bedrooms, each step too loud in her ears. "Damien." Still nothing. Then the front door slammed inward with a crack that ripped through the whole apartment. Ava gasped. 3 men in dark clothes rushed through the entry faces, covered guns already up. One of them saw her instantly. There. Everything after that happened too fast to think through and too clearly to forget. Ava ran. Bare feet hit polished wood hard enough to sting. The corridor seemed longer than it had an hour ago. She could hear the men behind her, hear one of them shout, hear another say, "Not to shoot her high, take her alive." The words sent a fresh wave of terror through her body, colder than anything she had felt so far. A shot cracked. Glass exploded somewhere behind her. Ava flinched, stumbled, kept going. She reached Damien's bedroom and slammed the door behind her, twisting the lock with shaking fingers. Her breath came in sharp, broken pulls. She looked wildly around the room, spotted a low dresser, and threw herself against it. It moved inch by inch over the dark floor. The first hit on the door came before she finished. The wood shuddered. Ava cried out and shoved harder, muscles burning, lungs straining. Her mind seized on one thing: the encrypted phone. He had made her keep it near. She grabbed it from the charger by the bed, nearly dropped it, found his number already pinned to the top, and hit call. He answered on the first ring. "Ava." His voice broke something loose inside her. "They are here." Every trace of softness vanished from him. "Where are you?" "In your room, I locked it." "Good." Movement sounded on his end. Fast footsteps, doors, men's voices rising. "Do not open that door. They said they want me alive." The second hit shook the frame hard enough to rattle the dresser. "I know." His voice went lethal. "Stay low." The door groaned under another blow. Ava dropped beside the bed and pressed herself to the floor phone clutched to her ear. "Damien." "I am on my way." The wood cracked. One of the men shouted from the other side. "Open it." Her whole body shook. "I am scared." His answer came raw and immediate. "I know, baby. Keep talking to me." Ava pressed a hand over her mouth and tried to breathe quietly. Then the apartment erupted. Gunfire thundered somewhere beyond the bedroom walls. One shot, then 3 more. Men shouting. A body hitting something hard. Another gun going off. More voices. Mason, she thought dimly, though she could not make out the words through the pounding in her ears. Then Damien, closer now, furious, ice cold and blazing all at once. "You picked the wrong house." Ava began to cry without sound, tears spilling down her face as she crouched on the floor with the phone pressed so hard to her ear it hurt. Another shot. A scream. Then footsteps racing down the hall. The handle on the bedroom door jerked once against the lock. "Ava, it is me." She moved before thought caught up. She shoved at the dresser with every bit of strength panic gave her. It scraped aside just far enough for the door to crack open. Damien pushed through, gun in one hand, black shirt half open at the throat, hair disordered for the first time since she had known him. His face looked carved from violence. The second he saw her, everything in him narrowed. He crossed the room in 2 strides, caught her by the shoulders, and looked over her so fast it felt like being searched by heat itself. "Did they touch you?" "Number." His hand lifted to her face, rough and shaking with adrenaline, and relief flashed so starkly across his features it almost undid her. Then a figure appeared in the doorway behind him. One of the intruders bleeding from the mouth weapon still up. Ava saw it 1 second before Damien did. Damien. The shot split the room apart. He jerked violently. For a stunned heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then the gun fell from his hand and hit the floor. Ava screamed. Blood spread fast through the side of his shirt, dark and impossible and horribly real. But he did not go down. He turned with a sound that did not belong to any civilized man, lunged across the space, and drove the attacker into the frame hard enough to crack wood. The gun went spinning. Damien hit him once, twice, then slammed him against the wall and tore the weapon away with brutal efficiency. By the time Mason and 2 more men stormed in, the attacker was on the ground and not moving. "Clear," one of them shouted from the hall. Damien staggered back a step, then another. Only then did his knees finally give enough for him to drop to one side of the bed. Ava was with him instantly. Her hands went to the wound and came away red before she could understand what she was seeing. "No. No, no, no." "It is fine," he said through his teeth. "It is not fine." Mason dropped beside them and ripped the fabric open with a knife from his pocket. "It is through the side, boss. Missed center." Ava was crying openly now, trying to keep pressure on the wound while her whole body shook so hard she could barely feel her own fingers. Damien turned his head toward her, pain written all through the strain in his face, and somehow the first thing he did was lift a blood-streaked hand to her cheek. "Are you hurt?" The question broke her. "No," she sobbed. "I am not hurt." He closed his eyes for half a second and exhaled like that answer mattered more than his own blood soaking the carpet. Mason pressed a folded cloth to the wound. Damien hissed. "Doctor is on his way." Ava stared at him through tears. "You got shot." His eyes opened again and found hers. There was pain there now, and rage, and something stripped raw enough to look like truth. "They came because they know," he said. She could barely breathe. "Know what?" His hand stayed at her face, even as blood ran warm over his side, and Mason barked orders into a phone nearby. "That I love you." The room went utterly still around those words. Even Mason looked up. Damien did not care. His thumb dragged once over her cheek, smearing a streak of blood into the tears there. "I should have stayed away," he said, voice rough with pain. "I should have kept you hidden." "But I could not do it." Ava gripped his shirt with shaking fingers. "Do not say this because you are hurt." He gave a breath that was almost a laugh and almost agony. "I am saying it because I am hurt." Her throat closed. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the room still in focus. "I love you, Ava." She bent over him, forehead nearly touching his, and the answer came out broken and fierce. "Then do not you dare leave me." The doctor arrived minutes later, but by then, nothing in the room was the same. He came in without panic, carrying a black case and the kind of face people wore when they had learned long ago not to ask how blood got on Persian rugs in penthouses with private elevators. He took one look at Damien on the floor beside the bed, one look at Mason's hand pressing the wound, and moved with practiced speed. "Couch," he said. Damien made a sound of pure irritation. "I can walk." "You can bleed," the doctor replied. "Move." Under any other circumstances, Ava might have been startled by the fact that anyone spoke to Damien Kane that way and lived. But tonight, the room had already crossed too many lines to care about one more. Mason and one of the other men got Damien upright. Ava rose with him, one hand instinctively reaching for his arm before she remembered the blood. He leaned into none of them, though the pain had carved fresh tension into his face. Every movement looked expensive, measured, controlled by force rather than ease. The living room was a ruin of broken glass, overturned furniture, and the metallic scent of gunfire still hanging in the air. The doctor spread sterile pads across the long sofa with brisk precision and guided Damien down onto them. Ava stayed close enough that his knee brushed hers when she knelt beside the couch. The doctor cut away more of Damien's shirt and examined the wound while Mason stood nearby speaking into his phone in low-clipped phrases. "One through the side," the doctor said. "Lucky." Damien's mouth flattened. "I do not believe in luck." "No," the doctor said, reaching for a syringe, "but tonight I do." Ava watched with her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her nails had marked half-moons into her skin. The white shirt the doctor peeled away was soaked through at the side. Blood had spread farther than she realized in the bedroom. Seeing the full damage made her stomach turn cold all over again. The doctor cleaned the wound. Damien did not flinch, did not curse, did not give the doctor the satisfaction of hearing pain in his voice. Only the muscle in his jaw moved hard and deliberate every time the needle passed through flesh. His eyes stayed on Ava the whole time. She had seen powerful men before. Loud men, rich men, men who liked attention and mistook control for volume. Damien had never been any of those. But right then, bandaged open under bright lights with blood on his skin and danger still breathing in every corner of the apartment, she understood his power in a new way. It was not that he never felt pain. It was that pain did not change what mattered to him. The doctor tied off the final stitch and sat back. "You keep pressure on it tonight. No heavy strain, no alcohol." Damien gave him a look so dry it might have been funny anywhere else. "You have known me long enough not to insult either of us." The doctor packed away his instruments. "Then at least pretend to rest." "I will consider it." The doctor turned to Ava then, and the shift in his expression was almost startling. Not soft exactly. Respectful. "If he gets pale dizzy or starts bleeding through the bandage again, wake me. Do not let him talk you out of it." Ava nodded. "I will." The doctor left. One of the security men escorted him to the private elevator. The apartment grew quieter in his absence, but not peaceful. The air still held the shape of what had happened. Broken door, splintered wood, glass glittering across the floor like ice. A dark streak on the hall wall where one of the attackers had hit hard enough to leave evidence behind. Damien leaned back against the couch, pale beneath the tan of his skin, now shirt hanging open enough to reveal the fresh bandage wrapped around his side. Ava sat on the edge of the coffee table facing him, unable to stop looking, unable to believe he was still upright and speaking and watching her as if she were the one who needed reassurance. Mason returned from the hall with a thin, clear evidence sleeve in one hand and a look that promised no one in the city was sleeping easily tonight. "We searched the one still breathing," he said. Damien's gaze sharpened, and Mason held up the plastic sleeve. Inside was a folded note, damp at one corner, edges smudged dark as if it had been kept in a pocket too close to sweat or rain or blood. He had this. Damien held out his hand. Ava touched his wrist before he could take it. "Do not." He looked at her. She had no plan for what came next. No argument ready. Just a raw, new terror that every piece of this night seemed to open another door she did not want to walk through. "No more tonight," she whispered. His face changed at once. The violence in him did not disappear, but it bent around her voice. Around the fact that she was trembling, around the blood still drying on her fingers. "Ava, please!" For the first time since the men came through his door, uncertainty moved through his eyes. Not doubt. Never that. Something quieter and somehow more dangerous because it looked like helplessness in a man who never allowed himself the shape of it. Then he reached for her hand. His palm was warm despite the blood loss, steady despite everything. "Mason," he said without looking away from her, read it. Mason unfolded the note and flattened it once with his thumb. He read in the same neutral tone he might have used for a dinner reservation. "If we can reach her, others can too. Choose faster." The room seemed to constrict around the words. Ava felt Damien go still before she even turned her head. "What does that mean?" she asked. Mason did not answer. Damien did. "It means keeping you close is not enough anymore." His voice was quiet. That made it worse. She had learned enough by now to understand that the lower he spoke, the more final a decision had become before anyone else even realized one was being made. Ava searched his face. "What are you saying?" He drew a slow breath through pain and held her gaze with a steadiness that made the city itself feel far away. "I am saying that tomorrow everyone who matters will know exactly who you are to me." The sentence seemed to pass through her in stages. "Tomorrow. Everyone. Who you are to me." Mason remained where he was silent now, but the fact that he did not object told her more than words could have. She looked back at Damien. "You cannot mean that." "I do. That will make this bigger. It is already as big as it gets." His fingers tightened around hers. "They came into my home." Ava's throat closed around the memory of it. The shattered front door. The gunshot. The red spreading through his shirt. He saw it in her face. She knew he did because his thumb moved once across her knuckles, the smallest stroke of comfort from a man who looked more accustomed to issuing orders than offering tenderness. "I gave them room to think you were hidden," he said. "That was my mistake." "No." Her voice shook. "Your mistake was taking a bullet." The corner of his mouth moved not in amusement but in something more worn than that. "I would do that again." The answer made tears burn hot and immediate behind her eyes. She looked down before he could see them all fall. "Do not say things like that." "Why?" "Because I do not know what to do with them." His hand left hers only long enough to tip her chin back up. "Then start with the truth." Ava stared at him. The bandage showed white against tan skin. The room around them looked wrecked enough to belong to another life. Still, he held her face as gently as if they were alone in some softer world where no men had kicked in doors and no blood had hit the floor. "The truth," he said quietly, "is that you are not leaving me now." Something in her broke open then. Not fear, not exactly. The last brittle piece of distance she had been trying to protect for reasons that no longer made sense inside the wreckage of his apartment. She covered his hand with both of hers and nodded. "Okay." It was past 3 by the time the broken glass had been swept. The hall secured, the front entrance replaced with temporary steel, and the apartment had settled into an exhausted kind of quiet. Mason stationed 2 men outside Damien's door and 1 at the elevator. Lena brought Ava tea she did not drink and a clean cloth for the dried blood on her hands. At some point she realized she was still barefoot. When she came back to the living room, Damien had not moved from the couch. "You should be in bed," she said. His eyes lifted from the city beyond the window. "So should you. You are the one with stitches, and you are the one who had a gun pointed at her tonight." Ava came around to kneel beside the couch again. Then let us call it even. That earned the smallest curve at one corner of his mouth. She reached for the blanket folded at the end of the sofa and draped it over him carefully, trying not to brush the bandaged side. The intimacy of that small act nearly undid her. She had spent so long imagining what it might be like to touch him in simple ways, not just kisses stolen in offices or hands trembling from adrenaline, but this: straightening a blanket, brushing hair off his forehead, being allowed inside the ordinary edges of him. When she smoothed the fabric down over his chest, his hand closed around her wrist. "Ava!" "Yes." His eyes searched her face. "Are you afraid of me now?" The question struck deep enough to ache. Not because the answer was difficult, because he asked it at all. She sat back on her heels and looked at him for a long moment. At the cut of his mouth, the fatigue shadowing his face, the impossible fact of a man this dangerous asking for something as human as reassurance. "I am afraid of this world," she said softly. "I am afraid of men who think I can be used to hurt you. I am afraid of blood on your hands and blood on my hands and how quickly everything changed." He did not look away. "But I am not afraid of you." Something eased in him then. Not physically. The pain was still there. But deep under the control and the violence and the force he wore like a second skin, something unclenched. He drew her closer by the wrist still in his hand. Ava went willingly. She sat carefully on the edge of the couch beside him, one knee tucked under her, and he rested his forehead briefly against her shoulder as if the weight of the day had finally found a place to land. His voice, when it came, was low enough to belong only to the two of them. "I love you." The words were less dramatic this time than they had been in the bedroom. That made them hit harder. No gunfire now, no blood loss forcing truth out of him in raw pieces. Just a ruined room, a city gone dark beyond the glass, and a man who had every reason to hide behind control, choosing not to. Ava turned her face into his hair for one suspended second before answering. "I love you too." She felt him go perfectly still. When he lifted his head, the look in his eyes was almost unbearable in its intensity. Not surprise, exactly. More the shock of finally hearing something he had wanted and feared in equal measure. "Say it again." Ava smiled through the exhaustion and tears and bruised fear of the night. "I love you, Damien." He kissed her then. Not like a man claiming something in front of the world. Not like a man drowning. Just a deep, slow kiss that tasted of pain medication and coffee and relief. His hand rising to the back of her neck with a care that made her throat tighten. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes for a beat. Morning came too bright after a night like that. Ava woke in the room next to his and crossed the hall before she was fully aware she had made the decision. Damien was awake already, sitting up against the headboard in a black t-shirt, color still a little too pale under his skin, but his eyes sharp as ever. He watched her come in. "You should knock. You should heal. Those are unrelated." Ava shut the door behind her and crossed to the bed. The absurdity of him looking half destroyed and still impossible to manage nearly made her laugh. "You say that now?" she murmured, adjusting the glass of water on the bedside table. "But last night you let me order you around. I was bleeding, and apparently that is what it takes." His mouth moved faintly, apparently. She sat on the edge of the bed, close enough to see the edge of the bandage beneath his shirt collar where the fabric pulled. "How bad is it?" He looked at her. "You were there." "I know. That is why I'm asking." The truth passed between them. She was not asking about pain. She was asking whether the man she loved had almost died protecting her. He answered the question she meant. "Not close enough." Ava let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hand found his without ceremony this time, fingers lacing through his. The closeness already felt less impossible than it had 24 hours ago. Maybe trauma did that. Burned away the useless formalities and left only what mattered. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her. "You asked what official means." She nodded. "It means no one gets to guess anymore." Ava's pulse picked up. "And if I do not want that?" He studied her face with unbearable attentiveness. "Tell me now." The room went very quiet. She thought of the photo, the note, the gunfire in the hall, Ryan's last message, the year she had spent invisible and the one night it took for being seen to turn deadly. Then she thought of Damien on the floor beside the bed with blood running through his shirt, and his first question still being whether she was hurt. "I do want it," she said. Something fierce and relieved moved through him so fast it almost looked like pain. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. Good. The meeting happened that afternoon on a private floor in one of Damien's secure buildings west of the river. The room was long and windowless, built more for discretion than beauty. Dark wood table, leather chairs, soundproof walls. Men who carried power in different forms sat waiting when Damien entered, some in custom suits, some in heavy coats that still smelled faintly of cold air and smoke. There were faces from shipping unions, private security, political, consulting, nightlife, freight, and operations with names clean enough for public filings and histories dirty enough to keep them private. Mason stood near the wall as Damien led Ava inside, not behind him, beside him. The room fell silent. The silence held a different quality than the ones she knew from the office. This was not curiosity. It was assessment. Men who had spent years measuring each other by what they protected and what they were willing to destroy for it, looking at her and understanding almost immediately why she was there. An older man with silver at his temples leaned back in his chair and looked Damien over, once eyes dropping briefly to the side where the bandage was hidden under his suit jacket. So it is true, he said. Damien did not sit. Yes. Another man's gaze moved to Ava. She knows where she is. Ava met his stare before Damien could answer for her. Enough. A few expressions changed at that. Respect sharpened where skepticism had been. Damien reached for her hand and kept it. Her name is Ava Bennett, he said. She is under my protection, under my roof, and under my name in every way that matters. The room stayed very still. If anyone touches her, threatens her, follows her photographs, or speaks her name where it should not be spoken, or uses her to apply pressure to me, that is not a move against a woman. His voice remained quiet. Every man in the room leaned into it anyway. It is a move against me. No one interrupted. Damien let the sentence settle before he continued. And if it is a move against me, it becomes a problem for every route, every dock, every contract, every table tied to this one. Mason placed a folder in the center of the table. Photos, reports, evidence from the failed attack. Not much said. None needed. The point had already been made. One of the younger men opened the file and let out a low breath. They hit your home. Yes. Another man looked from the pages to Ava, then back to Damien. And you are making her official now. Damien's hand tightened once around hers. I should have done it sooner. A silence followed that sounded a lot like agreement. Then the older man at the end of the table lifted his glass a fraction. To the woman who made Kane stop pretending he bleeds. A ripple of dark laughter moved through the room. Damien's eyes stayed cold, but the faintest ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Careful. The meeting ended quickly after that. No speeches. No drawn-out pledges. Men in rooms like that did not need theatrics to understand lines had been drawn. In the elevator down, Ava finally exhaled. Damien glanced at her. You are quiet. You just told half the city I belong to you. His gaze rested on her face. Does that bother you? She considered the question honestly, then shook her head. No, she said, it is terrifying. That made him smile for real this time. Small, rare, enough to change his whole face. Good. Back at the office, 3 days later, the whispers had changed. They were still there. Of course they were. But they carried a different edge now. Less mockery. More caution. Ava returned to work in one of Damien's cars through a private entrance with a security detail she pretended not to notice and a desk that remained inside his office exactly where he wanted it. No one openly questioned it. 2 women from accounting who had once smirked at her in the hall no longer worked on that floor. A junior associate who stared too long during a file delivery did it only once. Ryan sent one final message to her personal phone around noon. Guess I never had a chance. Take care of yourself, Ava. She looked at the words for a long time before replying. Thank you for seeing me before anyone else did. It was the truth. Not the whole truth, but enough. That night, after the office emptied and the city softened under a wash of lights, Ava sat curled into the corner of Damien's couch with her legs tucked beneath her. He had changed into a black t-shirt and gray lounge pants, looking younger without his suit, and somehow even more dangerous because the polish was gone and only the man remained. He was reading something on a tablet. She was watching him. After a while, he looked up. What? Ava smiled faintly. Nothing. You are staring. I know. Why? She drew one knee closer to her chest and let the quiet settle around them before answering. Because a week ago you walked past my desk like I was part of the furniture. His eyes held hers, and now she said softly, "You look at me like I am the only thing in the room." He set the tablet aside. For a long moment, he simply looked at her as if he wanted the full weight of that truth to land without interruption. Then he reached across the space between them and touched the side of her face with a gentleness that still surprised her every time. "That was the mistake," he said. "What was not seeing you sooner?" The words wrapped around her like warmth. She leaned into his hand and he drew her across the couch until she was half in his lap, careful of his side, her head resting against his shoulder. His arm settled around her with quiet certainty. Outside, Chicago moved in its endless, restless way. Lights, sirens in the far distance, wind off the lake, men making deals, women hurrying home. A city full of people who would never know that high above them the most dangerous man in the room had finally found the one person who made danger feel secondary. Ava closed her eyes and listened to his heartbeat under her ear. Steady, alive. His lips touched her hair. "You are the first thing I see now," he murmured. She smiled against his chest, and this time neither of them looked away.